Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. I am so glad to have you with us. My name is Alexandra Alvarado, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Education here at the American Apartment Owners Association. I will be your speaker today. We're going to talk a lot about advanced tenant screening tips. I tried to bring some new information. So if you've been on any of my webinars before, I hope that you're going to learn something new. I see some of you trickling in. We had quite a few of you sign up for this one, so I'm really glad to see there's some interest in screening tenants and, of course, mitigating risk. It's always easier to get a good tenant in than it is to get a bad tenant out, of course. So we're going to go over a lot of those strategies. I'm going to go ahead and start out by sharing my screen so you can take a look at my slides here. Let me go ahead and get that started. And if you don't mind in the chat, go ahead and put where you're coming from. I'd love to know what city and state your rentals are located in. I do have a couple of state-specific things I'm going to be calling out. So if any of you are from any of those areas, I'll spend a little bit more time there talking about it. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Just a moment. Okay. Let me know if you can see this okay. I think I might be like a little cutout here. I'm trying out a slightly different format so you can see me talk, but I will be on and off camera here as we go along. Love to see this. Rose from San Diego, Gigi from the Bay Area. We got Marion from Los Angeles. I'm in Los Angeles area too. Nice to see you. Lots of California, some Chicago, Missouri, Indiana, Oregon. Okay, great. Have lots here to go over, so I'm just going to dive right in. Real quick, we are recording this whole thing, so I know it's going to be a ton of information I'm going to throw at you, so don't worry, you're going to get the recording tomorrow. So you can review that along with the slides. Any resources that I might mention to you is all coming your way. So stay tuned. All right, so let's get started here. Quick disclosure, I'm not an attorney. The information provided here is not going to be legal advice. I'm really just providing it to you as educational purpose and just best practices. So if you have a specific question about a specific resident or situation, always talk to an attorney and then follow your policies that you have set in place. If anything I say is different than that, implement that change only when you get that approval. All right. So quick for today's agenda. What are we going to go over? Some scammer tactics. You might know some of these, but it's always good repeating them, I think, just in case you don't. Also, some tenant interview tips, how to collect documents, what documents to collect, what to look out for fakes, analyzing credit reports, new background check laws, and just about background checks in general and how you can use that information, and also risk mitigation tips. We'll go over what you can do. Even if you do everything right with tenant screening, there's still always a possibility that something could go wrong. So we're going to talk about some of those risk mitigation tips. And then we'll do a Q&A at the end. So you can put your questions in the question box, please, not the chat, so that I can keep track of them just a little better. Okay, let's get started with some scammer tactics here. Okay, so I have internet-based real estate crimes rose from 213 million in 2020 to 397 million in 2024. That's almost double. So we're seeing this increase in scammers of all kinds, specifically targeting real estate. There's a lot of money to be made in it. This goes from the home purchase, but also a lot of it is in the renter space. So what do we see most commonly? Identity and document fraud. I'm sure some of you, if you could say it in the chat, if you've come across a fake paycheck stub, I'm sure I'm not the only one. Certainly that does happen quite a bit. What is a way to prevent that? Require multiple forms of ID and income verification documents. We're going to go over what those are specifically in just a bit, and more details on that to come. Squatters, right? We saw a rise of squatters post-pandemic. It's definitely more lucrative to be a squatter than it used to be. This goes for either squatters taking over a vacant property that they know is vacant and they're going to move in all their stuff and they're going to have a fake lease in hand. And then when you go to evict them or you call the police, they'll claim that they have a lease with you. The ways that you can prevent this from happening: installing security cameras on vacant units specifically. I put InstaShow here. They're one of our partners, and they actually have some really cool cameras that are pretty affordable that you can Velcro basically. So they're not permanent. You can stick them on and off of, the entrance or the main entry points of the house. Because if you can catch a squatter on camera, then you have a case. Otherwise, you do, in many cases, need to go through a standard eviction process. And so the best thing to do is to show the break-in. And a lot of times, unfortunately, landlords don't have that footage. And so they do need to go through more proper channels. Now, some states have enacted some laws to make squatting illegal and also criminalized a little more. But it's still something that you need to consider. And I think the best way to do it is honestly just prevention. So having cameras in place and making sure you're monitoring that. All right, another one: scammers posing as landlords, renting out your property when vacant or when not vacant, honestly. So this happens quite often. They'll take the money from the tenant, they'll take the security deposit, and then they disappear and they pretend to be you, essentially. Quick question here from Gabby. Should the camera show the front door? In a condo, it's hard to put a camera in the hallway, but we can put a camera inside the unit by the entrance. Yes, really wherever you think you can display a break-in would be ideal. Um, Another thing you could do here for this particular scam is regularly check your address on Google. I recommend once a month just hopping on there and seeing if your address is listed on Craigslist or Zillow or whatever it is. They can easily take your photos and pretend to be you. So you want to catch that before any renter really gets scammed, and you as well, right? Another one here is to attempt to pay the deposit with a fake check or overpayment of deposit. So they'll give you a fake check. It sometimes takes a while for banks to clear a check. And even if they clear it, they might go back on it if they find out it's fraud later. And then they basically disappear. We never hear from that renter again. Or they move in and they have now officially gotten the keys and they didn't pay a deposit. Or they overpay the deposit and then ask you for a refund. If they overpay with a fake check, right? And then they say, oh, sorry, I paid you too much. Can you refund me back a little bit? Then in that case, you now have sent them money and the check was never real to begin with. So the best thing to do with that is to ask for a money order or a cashier's check, which doesn't technically bounce and only accept the amount that you asked. Of course, don't give them the keys until you've had all of this cleared and the money is in the bank. No matter how nice the tenant might seem or how much they might need to move in, it's definitely worth just waiting till you have everything. A couple other ones I'm going to go over: fake references. That's a common one. What do you do with that? Require and call multiple references. Even just telling them up at the front that you're going to be calling multiple references might automatically scare away some scammer kind of tenants, right? They don't want you really looking into their history. So they're going to be more likely to run away if you say you're going to do more of your homework. Also, the nice guy story. So if they're, really nice and friendly, they're also in a rush. They might be tempted to skip some steps, right? So you always want to make sure that you're sticking to all the steps that you have in place for your tenant screening, no matter who it is, how nice they are or not nice they are. The process should be the same. So trust data, not people. Also, moving in with current tenants, that's common too. So you might get someone who is technically not a guest anymore, who has now stayed for months on end. They never were a part of the lease. What do you do? Technically, it is a lease violation, so you could go through an eviction process, but you could also let tenants know ahead of time that any guests that come in will be essentially a tenant after said period of time. They need to be screened and accepted into the rental unit. And then if they are not, they cannot live there. And then if they don't do that, that is a lease violation that does result in eviction. So I would say if this is particularly important to you, if you've had this experience, to really highlight it in your lease agreement and make sure that they understand what your policy is. Vince asking if this presentation will be shared and accessed. Yes, we will share this full presentation. Says that my face is covering the slide, so I'll go ahead and remove myself here from this setting here. Just a moment. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. That might be better. I'll just get off camera for just a bit. So regular inspections is a way that you could prevent moving in with current tenants and making sure that you're screening all tenants over the age of 18, no matter what point that they move into the rental. Also, fake or deceased SSN. That's a common one as well. So we want to make sure that we're ordering a social security number fraud report. We'll go over that briefly in a few slides. And also any alias names that they might have. If they are intentionally misspelling their name, it can really throw off the background check and basically really it's not good information, so you're not going to get a good valid report back. Make sure that you are ordering a previous address history report through us. That's where we use the person's social to pull up any names and any alias names that are associated, and we check those names to make sure that those aren't part of any criminal or eviction records. And so it's very important to look at that report. If no results come back, that could be that they gave you a bad name or that they gave you a bad social. Also, an incorrect date of birth is a common one. So if you have someone who's giving you a bad date of birth, that's also going to mess up the criminal and eviction check quite a bit. So absolutely make sure that you ask for multiple forms of ID. Our report will, in some ways, if you order the social security number fraud report, it'll tell you what date of birth is associated with that social. So that could be one way to verify the date of birth as well. But honestly, the more forms of ID you can get, the better, because that really helps you to really make sure that that date of birth is the same across everything. And it becomes a lot harder and a lot more work for them to fake it if you are asking for more than just one thing. Also, let's go over the tenant interview process. So quickly before we do that, want to look at the fair housing recap. I always go over this. It's so important. I don't want you all to find yourselves amidst a fair housing lawsuit. So just a quick review here. Fair housing is nationwide, but there are additional state requirements in some states. So make sure you are also looking at your states. I'm going to go over just the nationwide fair housing protected classes. For reference, this would apply to all of you on the call. Race, national origin, skin color, religion, sex, LGBTQ, that was recently added, familial status, and disability. And so anything that you are saying in your interview that could be interpreted as being discriminatory towards any of these protected classes is really what we want to avoid. And a lot of times this is extremely unintentional. And unfortunately, it still creates an issue, especially if you are asking certain questions that might touch on these protected classes. So quickly, I see a couple things here in the chat. It says, what does PATH stand for? Previous address tenant history. So that's the address history of the tenant. It is a product that we provide in our screenings. Sarah says, I caught a tenant who used a fake previous landlord reference by looking up and contacting the actual owner. They immediately uncovered the scam. Absolutely. Calling that previous landlord or asking for even more than one is going to make a huge difference in potentially uncovering a scam. And, I always say it doesn't hurt to ask and see, what a previous landlord thought of them if they do exist anyway. So definitely worth doing your homework there. Um, Another question here about Section 8. So Section 8 can be different depending on the state and as far as screening goes. I'll try and point out where that might be different, but it's definitely worth consulting with an attorney for Section 8 housing. So some of what I'll go over, like I said, I'll call out, but this would be for general tenancies. And then also, I'm seeing here a cashier's check. Yes, I did mention that earlier. That is a great way to get a security deposit securely. Okay. And then Elizabeth asking, could advertising as a 55 plus community be thought of against fair housing familial status? No, it shouldn't be. If it's a verified 55 plus, everyone is 55 plus. That is an exception to some of the age restrictions, right? You can't do that in regular housing. But if it is senior housing, it's a bit different. So that's a great question. All right, so let's go over some of the best practices. So first off, I get this question often is, are pre-screening questions okay? Or what do I ask when a tenant is interested in the rental unit? If maybe they give you a call, what does that call look like? You basically want to always discuss your standard rental criteria. And so what that means is you are essentially going to say the same thing to every applicant. And if you have someone calling on your behalf, they need to say the same thing too. So make sure you have a script, a list of questions. They're going to say them in the same order and they're going to say them in the same wording every time. And I know that there's nuance in conversation and whatnot, but the more you can stick to the script, the better. That is going to help you to make sure that if you ever were to get any sort of discrimination claim, you can show that you always ask the same questions or tell them the same thing. Also, don't make a decision right there on the phone. Don't imply that they are pre-approved or that they won't get approved. That all can be seen as discriminatory as well. Wait for the tenant screening report, go through all the processes. Don't tell them not to apply. Give everyone the same opportunity, give everyone the same information. If they don't feel like they will qualify, then they won't apply. And if you are charging an application fee, most likely they're not going to want to pay for that application fee if they don't think they're going to qualify anyway. So the more clear you are on what your criteria is, the less likely they are to apply if they don't qualify, and therefore they don't waste their time and neither do you. But again, it doesn't need to be the same every single time or the same as you can get as possible. Also, you want to note the date and time of the call and take notes. So there's some property management softwares that can even call record or phone services if you want a full recording. But if you don't have that, that's okay. You can just make sure you take some detailed notes, and that will always help you to keep track of when someone called so that you don't show that you have favoritism towards any particular person, right? If someone called before the other person, maybe that's the one that you send the application to first, and so on and so on. That's the might be the one that you end up considering first because of that. A couple red flags you want to note during the tenant interview. If someone else shows up in their place or if they come with other people, again, not necessarily for sure that, it's they want a bunch of people to move in, but it is a little suspicious. You kind of want to make sure what that relationship is and why someone else came with them or came in their place. There's also overly negative comments about previous landlords, right? So if they're already negative, they're already coming in talking about their previous landlord, that could be a little suspicious. If they're in a big hurry to move and you don't really see a legitimate reason for it or any provable reason, then that's also a bit of a red flag too. Maybe they want to move in so quickly because they have an eviction case that hasn't closed yet and it's not on public record. So make sure that you're sort of sensing if there really is a reason or if it's just that they're trying to maybe, get away from a record or something like that. If they're late or hard to coordinate with, right? I would say, don't go chasing tenants. If you have a set time with them and they don't show up, move on to the next one. And if they come on time before the other one did, then that's fine. It's whoever is able to come first or is most easy to coordinate with. That's who you're going to be considering first for your rental application. Also, if they criticize the rental excessively, probably not a good start, right? First of all, probably not a good fit for them, but also could result in some issues later. And if they ask suspicious questions about, for example, how many guests they're allowed to have and for how long they can stay, if you have a strict no guest policy, clearly that would not be ideal, right? And then let's move on now to what not to ask. So, a lot of these questions I know are going to seem completely innocent, and you might look at this and think, I can't ask that. Um, it's not that there's a law that says you can't, but These are just some suggestions as to what you probably shouldn't ask because it may touch on a protected class. One is, where do you work? This would imply that you are assuming that they have a job or that they need to have a job in order to rent. Now, this isn't a problem everywhere, but specifically in California and a few other places, you cannot discriminate on source of income. And so this is something that would be a little more state specific. You don't necessarily want to imply that they have to have a job or a full-time job at that, right? What you do want to ask is whether or not they have sufficient income. Now, wherever that income comes from, whether it's employment or not, is, another story, right? But it's more so basing it on just income, not their work status. Also, do you have children and how old are they? Yes, this is necessary to know in terms of occupancy standards, but it's probably best not to use children necessarily, more so how many occupants will be in the rental, and are there any 18 and over because they will need to be on the lease if so. So those are better ways to ask that question without really touching on familial status. Also, are you and your co-applicant married? This one also touches on familial status and even LGBTQ plus. If you have seen that recent law that was passed about that, it's probably best not to go into the marriage aspect. I know some of you might say, well, if they're married, maybe they're more likely to stay on the lease together. But at the same time, it does touch on familial status, so I might avoid this question altogether. Do you attend church? That goes into religion or even mentioning that there are churches nearby. What's your accent? Clearly, that's going to be national origin, maybe even race. So, probably a good idea to stay away from that question, even though you might be curious. And do you have blank disability? So, if it's visibly obvious, even if it's visibly obvious, you really should just wait for them to tell you what their disability is and what kinds of accommodations that they might need. So just let them ask you rather than you ask them. Also, let's go over what you should ask. So obviously full names, we know that's very important, and any name variations, especially if they recently, got married, it's not because they're married, but it's just because they have different names, right? So we want to make sure we're getting as many name variations as possible. Also, when do you need the unit? So more logistics. How many bedrooms and bathrooms do you want? This goes into occupancy a bit. So instead of asking how many children you have, maybe you ask them how many bedrooms they need if you have multiple units with different numbers of bedrooms. Also, I would say, side note, make sure that you understand your occupancy standards in your area. So you should know how many people max could live in your rental unit by law. So therefore, you're not excluding families, but you're rather going based off of a number that is either local to you, or, in either local or statewide, that kind of tells you how many people you can have. And I would suggest talking with an attorney if you're not sure exactly how many people are able to live in the unit. What amenities do you want? So instead of mentioning to them that you have amenities that children would like, for example, it's just better to tell them what all the amenities are, and then they can maybe decide if this is a good fit for them. Also, do you prefer upstairs or downstairs? This could be partly with the, disability, or even age. They can just tell you if they want, a downstairs. Don't assume that they want that just because maybe they, look like they might have a disability or it might be hard for them to walk upstairs. Also, how many people will be living in the unit? I went over this just on the last slide too. The key thing here is that it says people, not specific to if they're married or if they're children. You can ask age of 18 or over because that is probably going to be one of your requirements to have those people listed on the lease. So make sure that you are asking people specifically. And seven, which is very important, is how can they pay the application fee, security deposit, agree to the credit and background checks, and can I contact references, right? So again, this goes back to making sure that they understand that you are doing your homework and that they are going to be able to afford to pay for that fee, the security deposit, whatever it is that you need to charge. Otherwise, why bother, right? Let's not waste anyone's time. And I think also if they don't want to agree to, for you to contact references, that's a red flag. And it's good to ask that up front. Okay. Couple more. Why are you leaving your current residence? That might reveal a bit about what their intentions are. Also, what is your monthly income? Obviously, affordability. You might have a certain income to rent ratio that you're working with. Totally up to you. You're allowed to set that, make it the same for every applicant. Again, note that it says income, not full-time work. So any kind of income, it's usually safer to ask it that way. Also, can you pay for those move-in costs? Do you have pets? This is okay. You can have a no pet policy, but be aware they are allowed to give you an emotional support animal request. Let them come to you with that if they need that accommodation. We've done lots of webinars on how to handle those requests and how to know which ones are legitimate. So just keep that in mind. And if you have a no pet policy, or if you do have a pet policy, that you are accounting for how many pets they might be bringing. 12, are you planning on staying long term? That's okay to ask too. If you have an annual lease, especially, you want to make sure they can at least stay that long. And 13, do you have any questions? Of course, this is a great time for them to start asking you for those accommodations, for those questions that are going to help reveal maybe more about them, but also without you having to infringe on any of the protected classes or those kinds of questions. Okay. Now the next section is collecting documents. I'm going to pause here and see if we have any questions in the Q&A specifically. So you all will see the Q&A section of the webinar, and that is where we will be taking the questions from. So I see Elizabeth has asked, can we ask if they smoke or have pets? And yes, you absolutely can. So pets was one of the questions. Smoking is fine. Smoking is not a disability, okay? I know it seems like it to some people who smoke, but it's not. So you can absolutely ask if they have a medical need for medical marijuana. There is no need for them to do that via smoking. There are other methods. So that's also not technically a medical sort of question. Whether or not they smoke is optional for them. And so you definitely can ask. It shouldn't infringe on anything. And that's a good policy to have, in my opinion, if you want to keep your rental, hopefully not all yellow and smoke stained and smelly. So I would suggest having that. Um, Another question here from Brad about sending money for a deposit by Zelle. I would check with Zelle's policies on how exactly they receive money and how long it takes for them to clear, because that's the time frame that you have where you don't want to get the lease, sign the lease if it hasn't cleared yet, right? So just check in with Zelle if that's what you're using, because that would be my only concern. Also, Ellen, do all these rules and suggestions apply to short-term rentals and or renting out a room in your home? Absolutely, Ellen. I definitely think it does. I think these are all great questions to ask, probably especially if someone's going to be in your home, because you're going to have to live with them. So I would say absolutely, these are great questions for any kind of rental. Also, Ari says, if a prospective tenant says that they don't qualify over the phone or on Zillow, are we allowed to tell them that? Do we have to let them fill out an application even though they said they don't qualify? I would say yes, let them do it. Now, if you have a non-refundable application fee for all your applicants, well, there's a chance that they're not going to get their application fee back. They probably know that. You don't need to tell them that. It's probably best to just let them make the decision on their own. Again, none of this is like there is a law that says you can't do this. This is more so you just want to be careful that you're not creating a case for yourself where it looks like you might have been discriminatory or you are misleading them and basically discouraging them from applying to your rental for maybe a different reason, right? Like one of the protected classes. So I would say I wouldn't. Um, I would allow them to fill out the application, and I wouldn't say anything about whether or not they would qualify. I would just say these are the criteria. If you think your income is too low, it's up to you if you want to apply. All right. Bruce, yes, I will be sending a video of this whole Zoom meeting so you can review it as well as the slides. Okay. Scarla, are real estate brokers that help landlords locate tenants, as real estate brokers that help landlords locate tenants, does the company need to have a standard or should we get a standard from each landlord we represent? I definitely think the landlord should set the standard. Now, if you have your own set of standards and you come to a landlord and you say, these are the standards that we have, do you have anything different that you would like to see or any criteria that you would like to add? They might just be fine with what you have if you have something comprehensive in place. And so they don't have to go with your criteria, but I think if you have already something that most likely they'll agree to it. Okay. Also, if one landlord rejects a tenant, is it the brokerage's responsibility to reject the tenant and send them a letter? So if the landlord is actually the one making the decision, and they have received the report themselves, then they're the ones who are sending the letter typically. If you're being hired out, though, I would check with an attorney to see what your agreement looks like, and see if you would be the one that needs to send them a letter as well. But definitely check with an attorney to see who would be the best to send that letter to the tenant and provide the rejection. We're going to go over adverse decisions in just a bit. Okay, limits on application fees. That's a great question, Yehuda. Depends on the state. So New York is the lowest, $20. From there, there's other states that have limits where it's based on inflation. So it's like a base plus inflation. I know California is like that, and it's up to like almost $60 now with how much inflation is. So most of the time, you can just charge the application fee equal to the screening. So whatever you paid for the screening report is typically okay. But some states say you cannot charge more than the cost of the screening. Definitely check your local laws and see what the limit is there so that you don't violate any laws. Also, suggestions to obtain criminal background. We're going to go over that in just a bit, Sarah. All right, let's move on. We're going to go to collect documents. So first of all, we want to collect documents for ID. So important. What kind of ID? There's lots of them. It's not just a driver's license, okay? We can get state ID, passport, social security card, individual taxpayer identification number, or an ITIN. This is a great one for me to point out here because this is for people who don't yet have a social. However, they are using an ITIN number to apply for a credit card, possibly, or to do other things that you would normally use a social security number for. It has the same number of digits. We can't really verify if that ITIN is legitimate, but we can use it to see if there's any credit history related to it. So if they don't have a social, you can still get an ITIN. Now, some of you in California or Illinois, you might be saying, I heard that we can't ask for a social. It's a little bit up to interpretation. Check with your attorney, but you can ask, but you can't require it. So if they say, I don't have one or I don't want to give you one, then you have to ask them for a different type of ID, right? Ideally, you would be getting a social or an ITIN from every applicant because that makes a big impact on the background check. So if you can, try to get it. And one other form of ID. So a passport or state or driver's license. I would say two is probably nice to have just so that you can verify that date of birth. And again, if they're faking it and they're creating a fake ID, it's so hard to create a fake passport and a fake social and a fake driver's license. So if you ask for one or two, or sorry, two or three of these, that's going to be less likely to happen. And this question here I already answered about what to do if they don't have one or they don't want to provide one. Definitely check your state if you can deny them based on that or not. And also make sure that everything matches. And if there are variations, which totally does happen every once in a while, you might see maybe someone who has a lot of names, which is common for international applicants. You can ask for them to explain a little better as to how their name is set up and why it might be different on one versus the other type of document. Another reason that we want to collect documents is to verify income. Income is so important. I don't care if someone has an 800 credit score, they cannot afford to pay for the rental, then that's a problem, right? So we definitely need to verify it. Now, this is a California legal definition of source of income. They define it as any lawful verifiable income that's paid to directly to a tenant or to a representative of a tenant, including federal, state, or local public assistance, federal, state, or local housing subsidies, not limited to federal housing assistance vouchers. What does that mean? Section 8, right? So someone asked about Section 8. That is technically income in California, okay? You have to consider it income. You cannot say that it needs to be all 100% from full-time employment. Now, this isn't the law in every state. Every state might have a variation of this, so check it out for yourself. But I will say that if you are looking at just income in general, you know, I would be open to considering maybe a slightly different type of income if it was maybe yeah, I don't know, Social Security benefits or perhaps child support even. So having kind of all those income sources calculated is a good way, good practice to do it. Like I said, it's not like you have to do it by law in every state. Check with your local laws to see how they define income. So now to collect the documents to verify said income, a good way to do that is bank statements from the last 30 to 90 days. So the amount and the entity of the direct deposits should match the pay stub details. And this is a little hard to fake as well. And I would say that, almost everyone gets a direct deposit if they are working full time. So that's a good way to verify income as well. And the amount paid out for rent should match. So if they're using that account to pay rent, they're writing a check or a transfer. Most people don't pay rent with credit cards, so should be on their bank statement somewhere. You can also check for a healthy savings and checking balance, which is another good reason to have the bank statement. It basically tells you what happens if they do have a situation in their life that does affect their ability to pay rent. Do they have anything in the bank to kind of help them float for maybe a few months? Also, tax returns. This is great for self-employed applicants. Maybe they don't get a pay stub, but if you saw how much income they made last year, then you can feel a little more confident about this year. Also, I would say two pay stubs. Pay stubs can be easily faked. I know I mentioned that before, but again, the more you ask, the more things you ask for, the harder or the less likely it is that they're going to want to fake them. And then, of course, contact the employer to confirm. Okay, don't just take their word for it or look at the pay stubs. Pick up the phone, ask for HR, and tell them if they can verify that they actually work there. Some companies will charge a fee for that confirmation. I can tell you right now, it's absolutely worth it to know that they actually work there and that they actually make the amount that they said they do. And for Social Security benefits, which I mentioned, I have a hyperlink here. So when I provide you the slides, you can click it. Gives you some options for verifying that. There's also a phone number that they have. So there's usually a letter that the tenant can request that has, the official amount that they're going to be getting from Social Security. Couple other things. You can collect proof of renter's insurance policy. If they don't have one, ask them to get one. We'll go over that later in the risk mitigation section. Utility bill with their name. Not a bad idea to see that they paid their last utility bill and that their name matches all their other identification. Letter of employment status if newly hired. So if they're moving from out of state, let's say they haven't started working yet, so they don't have a paycheck stub for the new employer, have the employer give them a letter or some sort of proof that they have been hired and they are to start soon. And then a personal reference letter or guarantor letter would be great if it's their first time renting. So if they don't have any renter history or maybe even income if they're a student, then you can at least have some sort of reference that can help you feel like if they weren't able to pay rent or if their student loans, don't come through, that there is someone else there who can maybe take over that lease agreement. Okay, and I'm going to pause here yet again, and we are going to look at the questions. Okay. How can you run a credit check without a social security number? Well, we need to have a social or an ITIN. If they don't have either, they don't have credit history because to open up credit history, they do need to have one of those two numbers. And so we can run it without a social if there is an ITIN. Again, that's an individual taxpayer identification number, and it's what people get before they get a social so that they can pay taxes and open up lines of credit. All right. Cecilia says a lot of people, particularly younger people, are not using traditional banking. Interesting. So, there has to be maybe something that they're using, right? So if they're using some sort of app or any kind of paper trail that you can get on it, I know there's some people out there, although very few, that operate all in cash. A little tough to verify some of those things, right? So use what you can, but that's certainly something I think that is popping up a little bit more. But even so, even with non-traditional banking, there should be some sort of record of the transactions in that account. Also, Sam asking if you can ask for renter's insurance from a current tenant. We're going to go over that later, but short answer is yes for now. I've had past landlords, says Lavender, that they say they won't fill out a rental verification because it's against their policy. Is that normal? And what do you do when that happens? Totally normal. I hope it's not as common as because it's unfortunate if they can't really help you out, but it is up to them, right? So ultimately, they are in control of what information they will or will not share with you, right? They don't have to tell you anything. However, ask. Why not ask, right? Worst thing they could say is no. If that does happen, or if they don't have any response, then you really have to know that that is a missing piece of data now that you have. You really need to maybe rely more on some of these documents that I was mentioning. Maybe you have a policy in place that if you don't hear from the landlord, you're going to ask them for, a utility bill, a tax return, a bank statement, and all kinds of different things so that you really feel confident in their ability to pay rent. Or maybe it's part of your policy that you do have to contact them in order to rent to this person. So really think about how you would feel in that situation and set a policy in place that you would feel comfortable with. Shelly says, if a potential tenant applies and you don't want to accept them, do I need to give them written notice that they were not accepted? If so, is there a form that I should be using for this? We're going to get to this in a moment. The answer shortly is yes. You do need to give them a written notice. All of our reports, whether you're with AAOA or Tenant Alert, include a pre-written notice of adverse action, as it's called sometimes, basically that you didn't accept them. So you can use our form or you can have your own or attorney draft one for you. But certainly you do need to tell them and also why they were not accepted is part of that as well. Okay, let's move on because I'm seeing some questions that are, bleeding into some of these future topics I'm going to be talking about. There was one more, Naomi asking about birth certificate as a form of ID. Sure, I think that's a good one. I'll add that to the list. Okay, so quickly analyze a credit report. So I want to go over some common misconceptions about what is actually on a credit report. So this might be news to some of you, but income is not on a credit report. So how much you make does not affect your credit score. An employer, sometimes you might see that, but the credit bureaus, they are not in the business of verifying employment. So if it was somehow reported to them, they don't really know if that person still works there. And sometimes they don't know even the dates that they worked there. So take it with a grain of salt. Okay, definitely still verify the employer on your own with all of the documents and everything we've already talked about. Utilities are rarely on there. Sometimes if they stop paying utility bills, you'll see a collection. So that might be a red flag you want to look out for. Monthly rent, rarely, although that is changing. There are now more rent reporting services. California recently passed a law that does require landlords of a certain number of units to report rent to the credit bureaus or give the tenant an option to report the rent. So it would be like essentially like a line of credit showing whether or not they paid rent. And that's rare, but I think that's going to change. Evictions are not on a credit report since 2017. Neither are civil judgments, so any other kind of lawsuit. And tax liens, state and federal, are also not on a credit report. Now, if a landlord or property management company takes a tenant to court and they get a judgment and they use a collection agency, then it can be reported as a collection on the account. However, if that just doesn't happen or the landlord decides they don't want to follow through with the lawsuit, then essentially that's not going to affect their credit whatsoever. I know it's crazy. Someone can get evicted and have no repercussion on their credit report. Medical debt is sometimes, there was a new law passed last year about medical debt reporting that has limited how much debt is on a credit report. Also, recurring debt, which would be like a credit card, any line of credit, always on there. Collections are always on there. Bankruptcies, almost always. Late payments and installment debt, like loans, that kind of thing, are on there. Credit score, usually. Some people, if they just opened a line of credit, it might take a little while for their credit score to appear. So, usually, we'll see that. Check writing history. So, if they've written bad checks, we wouldn't know that from a credit report. We also wouldn't know their checking and savings balance. All right. What has changed recently? So I mentioned medical debt reporting changed. State and federal tax liens and civil judgments were removed, as I mentioned. We also have seen a lot of educational loan deferments. Now, deferments were made on students' behalfs that had certain types of payment plans. They're still under deferment now. This happened throughout the pandemic, but then again reinstated in 2023 and 2024 when the Biden administration was considering forgiving student loans. So there are loans that are still under deferment. I say this because you'll see on the credit report, if a loan is under deferment, it's not going to tell you how much they are going to be paying monthly, and also not going to tell you whether or not in the past they were paying. It's going to show as if they had been paying this whole time. So it's definitely, if you see a large student loan debt, make sure that you're aware that as soon as the deferment ends, they're going to have to start paying that loan, and it might be substantial. And the credit report isn't going to tell you how much they're going to have to pay in the future. So just keep that in mind. Make sure they have a little bit of wiggle room if you see quite a bit of student loan debt. Also, court and collection agency delays. So still seeing that across the board, which of course then makes it so that credit scores have a bit of a delay in getting affected, even when there is a collection agency or some sort of court case involved. Okay, and let's go over some red flags that we should be looking out for in the credit report. So one is just because someone has an okay credit score does not necessarily mean they can afford to pay the rent you're charging. I mentioned that earlier. So looking at debt is one of the most important ways that we can find out if they can afford to pay your rent and their debt. Now, the way that you find out how much debt they have is by looking at the credit summary. You're going to find out there how much they have in debt revolving plus installment. So we know revolving is like credit cards, installment is like a loan with an end date. And those two payments monthly added together is going to be how much they're going to be paying out every month from their paycheck just to stay current on their credit card and their loan bills. And if you add those together, that's the total debt that they have essentially. And yeah, and then that goes to total monthly payment. So make sure that total monthly payment is a factor that you're using in determining if they can afford to pay rent. All right, just to show you where that is on our reports, and Tenant Alert is similar, debt is here. You see that? So revolving plus installment equals $518. That's the total debt. Now, the payment for that is $38 a month. So that's very low. That's probably not going to affect them. What we don't want to see is payment per month is hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and they don't even make that much income to begin with, right? If they have like a very fancy car or something like that, their installment debt might be pretty high. Okay, and let's go over some late payments, right? This is another red flag. There's a lot of different types of late payments. Some are worse than others. So I'm putting these in order of least bad to worse. So once it goes past the 90-day mark, usually gets sent to a collection agency. That affects their credit score. And sometimes if it doesn't get sent to a collection agency, the company will just write it off. And that also is potentially worse actually than a collection. And then lastly, repossession or foreclosure of said asset is also going to be probably one of the worst things you can see. And lastly, bankruptcy. Also, we want to look for negative trends. This is an example of a line of credit. You'll see this yellow here for April. That just shows that April, they were 30 days late. However, what you don't want to see is that the most recent months are all late, meaning that they used to pay their bill on time, but for some reason they've just been late every single month lately. Why? Is it because they're having a hard time paying that bill? Or maybe it's showing that it's unpaid and that they are now 90 days past due. This here, these little boxes, this is the visual for knowing whether or not they are struggling to pay. A couple other things as well, collections really important, right? We want to make sure that they don't owe money, especially that they don't owe money to a property management company or to a landlord. And so, what's the type of collection? Here we have a bank, not great. If it's medical, as I mentioned, there's laws now in place that do prevent a lot of medical debt from coming onto the credit report. But if you do see that, that's a little different, right? However, if it's related to utility bills, property management company, even a bank, I mean, those are all red flags. The amount is important as well. Obviously, if it's really high, not great. Date. So, how long has it been? Collections do stay on a report for about 7 years. So, if it was assigned quite a long time ago, then it's probably going to fall off soon. Versus if it was just assigned, then it might be something the collection agency is now actively pursuing. And that could affect their ability to pay rent. And of course, has it been paid? Usually when they pay it off, they can ask to have it removed. But if they didn't, then you don't hold it against them if they did pay it. Maybe just note that and ask them about it. Here's an example of a profit and loss write-off. Usually it's going to be in the remark or the account status where it shows you that it was a write-off. When it is a write-off, it does remove the payment history from the report. So unfortunately, you won't know exactly how long they were falling behind for, but it will tell you what their current balance is. So in this case, it's $1,124. So you know that this company is looking to collect that, not using a collection agency, but rather they're writing it off for now. Another one here is repossession or reaffirmation of debt. So this is what it would look like for an auto repossession. And then bankruptcy, there's several kinds. Couple just tidbits here. Some of you probably already know this, but it is most common to see chapter 7 and 13, where individuals can either do an asset liquidation or repayment plan. And the difference is really in also the time that it lasts on the credit report. Now, you might be open to renting to someone who's had a bankruptcy in the past. Maybe since then they've cleaned up their finances, they started over. I've seen cases where, there's people who've gone through divorces or through, unfortunate circumstances that have led to bankruptcy, but in the years since, it's been fine. So maybe it happened 9 years ago and they've now recovered completely. That's something to consider and think about ahead of time in your criteria if it is definitely a no-go or if there are some times where you might accept a bankruptcy. Also, want to look at the bottom of the report. It's going to tell you if there's any mismatch or warnings. Sometimes they're not necessarily that bad, even though it's telling you, oh, the address is different. Maybe you spelled road all out instead of RD. But in any case, a great place to look. And if you do see a warning on the on the credit report, make sure that you contact us so we can give you some more clarification. Um, a couple other things to note. Sometimes people think, okay, I got the credit report, therefore all the information I entered must be accurate. That's not quite the case. The credit bureau can pull a credit report on about an 80% match. So that's where the warning section comes in. They'll pull the report, but give you a warning. So they're really just trying to find a match in their system for that person's credit file. So just make sure that you don't rely on that too heavily. You look at some of the other reports to verify that the information is accurate. Also, you'll see there's AKAs or other SSNs that might indicate to you in the credit report that other variations of the social have been used in the past. Sometimes this can be accidental, but it's definitely worth looking and also, again, ordering that social security number fraud report. And also, previous addresses. We mentioned this at the beginning. If you don't see any addresses on a previous address history report, that usually means that the social you entered is incorrect, the applicant is too young or too new to the country to have established previous address history. So ask the applicant if they have credit history, verify the spelling of the first name, and verify that you entered the social correctly. Those are all going to create this message of previous address history not showing. And this is such an important report to have because it really is going to provide you with so many addresses that we can now search for evictions and criminal records. So it's absolutely vital that we have as many addresses as possible based on the person's social or ITIN number that they provided. Okay, next section, I'm going to pause here and take this off. It says, is it possible to move your name off of the slides? I didn't know that that was actually showing. Let's see. Is that any better? I hope. Let me know, Brad. I'm not too sure if that worked. All right. And the next one here, are we required to request proof of previous rental payments? You're not required to do that, but certainly you can. Not a bad idea to show that. Again, that can be shown in the form of a bank statement if it shows the amount that was paid out to the landlord or property management company. Okay, is political affiliation a protected class? No, not that I know of federally, but definitely check locally. I mean, I know, yeah, you say, I know it sounds crazy, could be an issue. So far as I know, it's not. But again, I'm not up to date on every local law. So if you aren't too sure, double check. Okay. Let's see here. How do you handle it when a married couple has one person with an acceptable credit score and the spouse has terrible credit that doesn't qualify? So, and you don't want to be discriminatory, right? But at the same time, I think it's important to have a policy in place, right, that you're applying equally to all of your applicants. So maybe it's an average if you feel comfortable with that. Sometimes it might be that you are not comfortable with that and you need both applicants to have over a certain amount. Now, it doesn't matter if they're married or not, right? If you have that policy for roommates as well, that's also something you could do. So it's not specifically for married couples, it's really across the board for any individual or individuals that will be on the lease agreement. All together need to have an average score of X, or they all need to have a score above Y. So I think that might be a better approach and not necessarily making it specific to a married couple, but just any co-applicant. Okay, another question here. I actually prefer tenants with children since they tend to be more stable and less problematic. Is that okay? Not necessarily, right? That's still familial status. So lack of children or, that's also an issue too. So I would say don't mention it, right? If you have an ad out, don't say that. Don't say it in person. It probably wouldn't be an issue with the people that you're talking to. I'm sure many families would be happy to know that you like children and you want them renting there. But it's probably best to just stay away from that. Again, it's not a law that says that you can't say it, but it's a little bit of like a gray area where maybe it's best to just avoid mentioning it. Can I prefer people who have a bigger paycheck? Absolutely. As long as you are looking in California specifically, total income, and someone has more total income than another person, that's fine. And yeah, you use income as the number one criteria. That's great. I think that's a good one to have, and it is very important. Can I ask for a copy of their bank statement to show that they can afford the security deposit and move-in expenses? Absolutely. We mentioned that earlier. Brad, you're saying my name is still there. I'm sorry, guys. I really don't know how to take my name out of here. We recently had a change with Zoom, and so I'm not too sure exactly how I can get this out of here. Let's see. Maybe that might work. Let me see. No. Okay. Sorry, Brad. You'll get the recording though. At least you can hear my voice. I wish I could take out the name there that you're seeing. Okay, Rose, how much is a Social Security fraud report and who provides one? Well, we provide it, AAOA.com, or Tenant Alert, our partner, also provides it. It's a part of our premium package, but it can also be added to any report. I believe it's $5. And so absolutely add it if you're not getting it already, or you can order the premium package, which is about $50. That does include the Social Security fraud report automatically. Ocean One, can I ask if they have any emotional support animals? So it's probably best to wait for them to request it from you. I don't really see an issue with asking the question, but it does touch a little bit on disability rights. So if they have a need for it, then most likely they will ask you, right? Okay. David, if a single family home was permitted for a specific quantity of people and residents, and the HOA recognizes the developer's occupancy permits as a basis for the number of renters, will the HOA position hold up if they seek to evict? Definitely something to ask an attorney, especially if there is a specific number of residents. I would say yes, but I think that's really going to be more of an attorney who can even decide if that's something that if you were to take it to court, you'd be able to really get a judgment in your favor for. Andrew asked, do they have to disclose an emotional support animal? Yes, if you have a no pet policy, right? Otherwise, they're breaking the lease. Now, they can make that request at any point. It doesn't need to be before they sign the lease. So if you find out they have it and then they say, well, it's an emotional support animal, then you can go through the proper channels to verify that. But you technically have to accept it if they do provide you with what is required. And we've gone over this on other webinars, so I'd be happy to send you more information about it later. Service animal would be the same. Is it legal to advertise no pet accepted? Yeah, you definitely can have a no pet policy. I know there were some pieces of legislation floating out there that maybe would have changed that, but luckily those didn't go through. So at this point, you can say no pets allowed. Susan says, oh, this is about tenant broker. So let me actually get back to you, Susan, on exactly how it works if you're a broker, because that's going to be a little different than what I'm presenting today. Okay, Ari can use the Zillow app as a pre-screen. It's not the full application, so I wouldn't want a Zillow applicant to be considered having applied on the first come, first serve. That's fine. So you can definitely use that as a pre-screening just to get the information. You can also use AAOA's application as well. So if you wanted to, use that instead, that works too. So we already have the information, and then you can just screen them because the information is already in there. You don't have to do it twice, but it still would be best to have it be first come, first serve. But at the same time, I would say first come, first serve. I base that on having a complete application and a complete tenant screening and background check. Okay. So at that point, whoever completes that whole cycle, right? You've checked the references, you've verified the income. That's a complete application. Now they're being considered. And that's at the point is which you would make a decision. And whoever reaches that last endpoint first, that's who I would consider first. Again, this isn't a law, but it's just a suggestion for keeping things fair. Okay, I have a suspected smoker. I'm unable to catch him smoking, but I'm receiving smoking complaints. There's a no smoking policy on the lease. Any suggestions on how to go about proving this to evict this tenant? I would talk to an attorney to see what might be helpful, what kind of evidence you can get. Sometimes you can get witnesses. There's other kinds of techniques, but it kind of depends on the court and whether or not they might, go to court. You might take them to court. And then if the judge just says, okay, just stop doing that, and the tenant says, okay, I will, but doesn't, then you're back in the same situation as you were before. So kind of depends on the court. I would say talk to an attorney in your area that can give you some suggestions on how to do that with like a better rate of success. Okay, can I charge an additional pet security deposit? Yes, you can and should. However, if it's an emotional support animal or service animal, you cannot. Also, make sure that the maximum deposit, right, in your state, if there is one, that you're not exceeding that. So any deposits combined, pet and regular deposit, must be less than the max allowable security deposit in the state, if there is one. Some states don't have a max. Okay. Is there a time limit for the amount of time it takes to process an application once turned in by a prospective tenant? Not that I'm aware of, but if it looks suspicious, you're kind of waiting too long, then I think there might be a case there for discrimination if typically other applications don't take as long, right? So my thing is always just treat everyone the same. So if it takes you, 5 days for every applicant, that's fine. But if it takes substantially longer for someone you don't like and they're from a protected class, that's probably going to put you in trouble. Okay, so let's go to background check reports. Ari, great question there, but I'm about to answer it. So might as well start on this section. Couple of things I want to mention. These are some great background check reports you might not be ordering. We have a bankruptcies, tax liens, and judgments report. So, as I mentioned, tax liens and judgments, including evictions, are no longer on a credit report. Bankruptcies are, but we include it in this report anyway. These public records are not on a credit report, so therefore you can add them to any package on our website, or you can order that premium package for $50. As I mentioned, it's going to have that in there. Now, this would be any kind of judgment. So if they were sued for damages to the rental, technically that's not an eviction, but it would show up on this report. Of course, eviction report. Of course, national criminal report, right? We want to know that information. Telecheck to see if they've written any bad checks. We know that's not on a credit report either. And again, the SSN fraud report, which you can add on as well to any of our packages, or again, order the premium. And you can also add on a landlord or employment verification where we are actually calling the landlord or employment or employer and verifying that, they make how much they said, they paid rent on time, et cetera. This is something you could do on your own too. You don't necessarily need to hire us for it, but if you are short on time, you want us to handle it for you, you can add it on to any report for about $15 each. And we'd be happy to, make those calls for you. But if you don't have too many, then, certainly you could just call them up yourself. We're just making the calls for you if you want. So a couple of myths with background check reports I like to go over. Some people think that there's like this single nationwide database that has all criminal information. And unfortunately, that's not the case. I wish it was. It's really a bit piecemeal. Okay. We have counties with their own policies of what criminal data they disclose, and then they don't talk to each other necessarily. So every county is a little bit different. We're aggregating a ton of data for you as much as we can online instantly, but there really isn't one single source and one single way that all courts report this data. Also, arrest records and pending records count. That's a myth. So just because someone is arrested or has a pending case, that does not mean that they're guilty, right? It's innocent until proven guilty is how it works here. So in the US, so therefore, yeah, someone might get arrested, but it's not going to come up on a criminal report. Also, a criminal search shows all records ever. That's also a myth. We go back 7 years. There's some states that might allow for a little more, but we stay on the safe side. That's 7 years, basically from the crime. And so if it happened outside of that time frame, it's not going to show up on their background check. Also, some people think all courts have a social security number on them. Unfortunately, they do not. Most court records have a date of birth, but they do not have a social always, or they might have like a partial social. So we're really relying a lot on that date of birth and that name spelling. That's why it's so important to make sure that you are using the right date of birth and name. Also, some people think they can find criminal info on Google. You can, right? To a certain extent. If they made the news, sure. But there probably is some other court cases where it's really in the court's database. You're not going to find that on Google. So when does a criminal record not show? If it happened more than 7 years ago, as I mentioned, if they weren't convicted, or if the record was sealed, expunged, or discharged, if they gave you a bad date of birth, name, or social, that's probably not going to work either. Fortunately, we have some other reports that can help you determine if that information is accurate. A couple other things that you want to look out for on the background checks. If that path report, remember that previous address history report, shows no records found or a different name, something's amiss, okay? Also, make sure that that SSN fraud report is showing you that that person exists and that that date of birth and everything else aligns. If there's no credit report found, could be a red flag. Not necessarily always, if they have a good reason for not having credit, they're very young or something like that. But if the credit bureau can't find anything on them, that's a little concerning, especially if maybe they should have or say they did have credit established. A couple of things are just like what we do with the data. So you're giving us this information or the applicant is giving us this information. What we do is we take that original application, then we use the social to run and the name to run a previous address history report. Now we've picked up a name variation and an address, a different address. Now we take both of those and we create an enriched application. And this all happens automatically through our system. So now we're able to check multiple addresses and name spellings for you. And that's really how we're able to get a very accurate eviction and criminal search, even though most of those records don't have a social on them. A couple other things, non-traditionals. I saw a question on this about students. That's definitely something that is non-traditional, I suppose. They might not have credit history, but also just note that you can still run a background check. So you can still do eviction and criminal without a social. What we would use in that case, we're going to rely a lot more on that name and date of birth. And unfortunately, we're not able to pull up that previous address history report to get more addresses, but we can at least check the inputs that you're giving us. So it wouldn't be like the enriched version, but you would at least know based on what you gave us that there were no criminal records with that specific name or date of birth. Also, we can, yeah, and as I mentioned, it would be only searched on the address provided. For international applicants, we do have international background checks, so you can ask us for a quote. Tenant alert as well, ask for a quote, and we can let you know how much that might cost. Really depends on the country. So I'm going to pause here, and we're going to go through real quick any questions. Okay, path is previous address tenant history. So that's to pull up any addresses, right? So we can check evictions at those addresses. Does the AAOA eviction search check all of the local court jurisdictions from any of the found previous addresses in the address search? Yes, I think I just answered that. So absolutely, we are checking all of those addresses. All right, let's move on to a legal review update. So criminal data, couple new updates, some of them not so new, but landlords can't require disclosure of criminal history on applications. If you have a question like that on your application, I do suggest you remove it, asking if you're a felon or if you have ever had a criminal record. Also, probably shouldn't have a policy that automatically excludes people with criminal histories. Some states have stricter policies than others on this. However, HUD guidelines, which it's not law again, but it is pretty much, it's a guideline that they enforce. You want to make sure that you're not automatically excluding people saying no felons on the ad or even in person. Also, we know in 2016, HUD gave the guidance as well. They basically differentiated between intentional discrimination, which is what we traditionally think of as discrimination, to disparate impact, which is unintentional. So I want to just point this out because sometimes I hear landlords really who have a good heart and they're not intentionally discriminating, but they still need to be aware of what this is because it doesn't matter if it's intentional. And that's pretty much what HUD has said since 2016. One is here, another update of 2024. So applies to all housing. Okay, everyone here on this call. Use of AI or automation in tenant screening may have a disparate impact. You must show a direct connection between the data you're using and why you're denying the applicant, even if it might seem obvious. So just note that if you're getting tenant screening, which is automated through us, that when you're making that decision about what data to use, just think of it as if you're in a court case and you're trying to justify why you used that piece of data. And that is something that needs to be direct. Now, the word direct is vague, right? But if it's related to payment of rent, okay, we can show that there wasn't enough income. That's clear cut. Now, if it's something else, like let's say they had a DUI, maybe not completely related to them being able to rent out your property. So again, good to talk to an attorney if you do get something you're not really sure if you're allowed to use it to make that decision. They also added now that evictions can have disparate impact. So this doesn't change anything in terms of how eviction records are shown to you or anything like that, but it is really just more so just showing that, there are people who are more likely to have evictions from protected classes. And so they've made that statement pretty clear. Also, that applicants have the right to appeal if rejected, and you must give them all documents showing the reason for the denial. Someone asked about that earlier. Absolutely, you have to tell them why within a reasonable time frame. There isn't really a specific number of days. It's just reasonable. I would say as quickly as you can to really show that you are trying to give them this information. We can send them a copy of the report for free if you've denied them, so they can also call us. We recommend if you order the screening through us or any screening provider that you contact them and ask them to do it because that's a lot easier and safer for that information transfer. That company, tenant screening company or AAOA, can give the applicant a copy of their report safely. And the full guidelines are here. I linked to them if you want to read it. It's a little boring, but it's very important. So I'll send you the slides so that you have access to this link. A couple other things. I want to note here, this does not prohibit you from running criminal background checks, okay? But you can't have arbitrary or overly broad criminal history related bans. It's likely to lack a legally sufficient justification, which to me says it's not going to hold up in court and you might get in trouble for doing it. Also, HUD guidelines, going back to that one more time. What matters here is the type of crime, the date of crime, efforts to rehabilitate. You really need to look at every single applicant individually. The same thing goes for evictions, looking at if it really does impact their ability to pay rent or their ability to be a good renter, and have they really done anything to change in the years since the crime. And if you're unsure, the record is incomplete, you give us a call. We don't want to accidentally deny someone if it's not really their record. So always good to just double check and make sure. Couple other things in California specifically, Alameda County, sorry, misspelled county to country, banned background checks. Los Angeles County removed the date of birth, making it difficult to find a match. Landlords must offer an ability to pay in lieu of a credit report of Section 8. So someone asked about Section 8. This is something different for Section 8 in California specifically. New York also passed a Fair Chance Housing Act recently, so just this month, limits how and when housing providers can ask about criminal history, and they have to provide a copy of the report, even if the applicant doesn't ask for it, and they have to give applicants 6 business days to correct anything on said report before denying them. $20 max application fee. That was previous to January, but I included that there as well. Again, if you're not in California or New York, I still think you need to look at your state and find out if anything new has been passed, like these laws, where you might have either missing data. There's not a lot you can do if they've blocked you from accessing criminal data, but also in your decision process. So some states like New York really have made it where you have to consider the applicant and all of their documents and everything before you run criminal history. And it's basically now the last step that you do. And the idea here is so that you're giving people a chance instead of just automatically denying them because they have a criminal record. So check in your state and your city, county, whatever it is, and see if that's a thing. Also, some other cities and states, not comprehensive. There's more. I don't know the whole list. Well, again, it changes so often. So, but these are some of the areas with similar laws. Also, solution. We have a partner that you can chat with, and it's $5 for a 7-day trial or $53 a month. You can ask as many questions as you want to an attorney that gets assigned to you that's near your rental. Highly suggest doing this. It's great for quick questions. I've personally used it myself, and it's really nice. I got assigned to a retired attorney who was really passionate, and he just gave me such good information. It was very thorough. So if you have lots of questions like, can I raise rent, or can I do this on the application, or can I have an emotional support animal? Can I deny this emotional support animal? Any questions like that, they can answer. So again, this link will be provided in the slides that I'm going to send you tomorrow. Evictions, another quick update. So we know evictions were removed. It's not going to be on a credit report. They typically don't include a date of birth or social. So that's why, again, that previous address history report is so important, because we're going to use that report to basically search for evictions at all of those addresses. Even if that record doesn't have a date of birth or social, if we know that that person lived there and there's an eviction record with their name on it at that address, we can be pretty certain that it's theirs. So solution here, order that public record report that I mentioned, or request it. Or again, any of our packages that have eviction searches include the previous address history report. So definitely worth putting in your order, basically. Couple of things on adverse action. Some people asked about this. So HUD guidelines, past actions unrelated to tenancy, past incidents unlikely to recur should not be the basis for denials. And this is very vague. Again, they're not telling you can't deny someone because they have an eviction, but they are implying that you should make sure there is a direct correlation between that eviction or whatever it is and your denial, right? Also, if you have set criteria, again, apply them consistently. If they don't meet the criteria, you can serve that adverse action letter, sometimes called a declination letter. It is in your tenant screening report when you order it with us or through Tenant Alert. You'll see it in the side. If you can't find it in the side of the report list, let us know. We'll help you locate it, and you can just print that out and email or send it to them via mail. Tenants have the right to request the report from the provider, and they have 60 days to do that. We would be happy to provide them a copy. They can dispute anything that's inaccurate. We do take disputes, although a lot of times it's tenants really just trying to see if they can, hopefully get accepted into the rental despite the record they have. But make sure, again, to contact us and your attorney if you have any questions about whether or not you're able to take that adverse action, and check the adverse action laws in your state specifically. Security deposit, a couple new things. So California security deposits are now capped at 1 month's rent for landlords with more than 2 properties or a total of 4 rental units, which is going to be a lot of you on the call. This goes into effect in July. Be careful with that. Also, there's some security deposit alternative bills where you need to provide tenants with an alternative to a security deposit. There's some states that had some similar bills. You could use LeaseGuarantee, which is included in some of our packages as a security deposit alternative. And I'll go over that in just a moment. And I think this is helpful also for really any landlord that's in a state that has a capped security deposit. If that's the only amount that you're allowed to collect, hopefully, nothing goes wrong. But unfortunately, 1 month's rent, as we know, isn't really going to be enough to cover usually damages or unpaid rent. So we're going to talk about some solutions for risk mitigation in this next section. So first off, renter's insurance. Yes, you can require it. No, you cannot require a specific type or specific brand of insurance. So let them, shop around, but they should be showing you proof that they have renter's insurance. Why is this so important? It's not just for the tenant's benefit. It keeps you out of it. So if anything wrong happens with their personal belongings, they can go to the renter's insurance policy before your policy gets touched. Also, dog bites and guest slip and falls. A lot of renters insurance policies will cover that as well. Takes you out of it, takes your liability out of it. If it's exceeding their renter's insurance policy, then your insurance policy gets contacted. But you don't want to be the first line of who gets contacted. And I mean, the less you can touch your insurance policy, the better, because every time you do, your insurance rates go up, even if it's not your fault. So we also have theft, natural disasters, as we saw, with fires and whatnot. It's great for us to have something in place to help the tenant out as well as you, again, so they're not coming after you to help pay for what damages or what things got lost. Here's an addendum. Again, I'm going to send you the slides with the links. If you do have someone do renter's insurance, you should have them sign an addendum or have somewhere like a clause in your lease that they're agreeing to have that policy throughout the life of the lease, and that if they don't, they're in violation of said lease. Also, we partnered with Liberty Mutual recently. So if you would like to recommend a renter's insurance policy to your tenants, you can recommend the Liberty Mutual policy. And I put a link here as well to that. And again, you can't require them to do Liberty Mutual, but it's a great company. They have some really good options for tenants. So you can just lead them there if they don't know where to go for their renter's insurance. Lease guarantee, I mentioned this briefly. Essentially, it reimburses you for court judgments from $1,000 to $10,000, depending on the policy you have. The issue usually isn't that you can't take a tenant to court if they stop paying rent, but it's really that you're probably never going to see that money. So what lease guarantee does is it pays you out if you get that court judgment. Whatever amount the court judgment is what you get paid out for. We know that collection agencies don't have a great success rate and most judgments are never collected. So this pretty much helps to mitigate that in a worst case scenario. You can get a lease guarantee on top of a security deposit. Maybe you pay for it or your tenant pays for it. But basically, the idea is to protect your rental income. You can fill a vacancy faster potentially if you can maybe accept someone who might be borderline more comfortably and ask them to buy a lease guarantee policy. And then they can qualify more easily, and peace of mind ultimately really regardless of the tenant, just knowing that if you had to take them to court, that you would see that money. So real quick, couple differences between lease guarantee and renter's insurance. Lease guarantee is going to cover intentional damages. Renters is accidental. No deductible. There's deductible for renters. Paid up front, paid monthly, usually. I think some renters insurance policies you can pay annually if you want a discount. Supplements is deposit, and renters insurance covers liability. So those are just some quick differences between the two. Both are great to have. I would say renters insurance for sure, minimum. But if you can also do the lease guarantee, this is also going to help you to, in a worst case scenario, have your money reimbursed to you. So here are some of the rates that we have for the different amounts of protection. And again, the tenant can pay for it. They can do it instead of a cosigner if they don't have one. You can reduce the security deposit even if you wanted them to get the lease guarantee and maybe do a smaller security deposit if they have good credit. You can pay for it yourself. A lot of our members do pay for it and they charge the tenant or they use it as a risk mitigation tool. They're investing in their business so that if something goes wrong, they know that that money is going to come back to them. Couple FAQs. It is for new tenants only, so you have to do it before the tenant signs the lease. The tenant has to have a credit score. It's an annual contract, so it can be month to month, but it would cover for 12 months. We don't have a way to just charge you for like 1 or 2 months. Also, if you pay or if the tenant pays, it doesn't matter. You're still the one who's going to get the reimbursement ultimately. And only one lease guarantee is required for the lease. So if you have like a married couple or roommates, really just need to get it for one of them. And then as long as everyone signs that lease, that's who's going to be covered under that lease guarantee policy. Another idea here is to have a cosigner. I know you all are familiar with this, also known as a guarantor. You can basically have them sign the lease. The idea here is that there's more responsible parties, means you're more likely to get paid. Make sure you're screening them, at least getting a credit check. Make sure that they have assets and a good credit history. And you list those co-signers on the lease. And this is important, any notices. So essentially, it's almost as if they live on the property. Just think of it that way. They need to be on every document, not just the person who lives there. And I would say this is something to consider adding to your lease that in the event of any lawsuit arising out of this agreement, that the tenant is appointing or the co-signer is appointing the tenant. So this helps in terms of like serving the notices and whatnot. Also, in some states, you can go directly to the co-signer without dipping into the tenant's security deposit. Make sure that that co-signer signs on everything, and you can combine it with lease guarantee. Why not do both? You can do a co-signer, you do lease guarantee, renter's insurance, and now you have like triple protection when you have that lease agreement signed. All right, Q&A. I know we went way over on time here, so I'm going to keep answering questions as long as you all have them. So how difficult is it to collect on a lease guarantee? If you get a court judgment and have owned the policy before the move out or eviction, do you just provide the court, do you just provide the court judgment? Yes, you do. So essentially, the way that it works is you just submit the court judgment to lease guarantee, and as long as it matches the name of the tenant, right? Then they'll pay you out within 30 days up to the policy amount. So really this depends on how confident are you that you can get a judgment in your area. So I know some areas it's harder than others. So if you don't feel like it's possible, then it might not be a good fit. But if you feel good about it, then absolutely. It isn't difficult to collect from lease guarantee. It's pretty clear cut, right? You serve the judgment, tells you how much it is, that's what you get paid. Okay, a couple more questions coming in. If you can put them in the Q&A, that would be great. I'm not really checking the chat too much because it's a lot. The Q&A helps me stay a little more organized. Sam, what if the current tenant refuses renter's insurance? That's a lease violation. So you can actually have that be grounds for breaking the lease, and you can talk to an attorney about how to proceed with that. But technically, they are actually in a lease violation if you require renter's insurance and they have either stopped their policy on purpose or they don't want to get it to begin with, then you don't have to accept them as a tenant. Is renter's insurance a good idea or available for short-term rentals? So it depends on the renter. So some renters, they have their own policy. So wherever they go, they're going to be covered. So if they already have a policy in place, you can ask for that policy. And so technically it's not like a short-term thing. It's like the tenant has the policy, and wherever they move to is where the policy will apply. And so if they're only going to be living there for a little while, that's fine, but just make sure they have a policy already in place. Let's see. Can I require renter's insurance from a current tenant? So if you already have a tenant and you didn't require it when they moved in, the best time to do it would be at lease renewal if it's an annual lease. If it is within that year, you want it sooner than the renewal date, you just have to have the tenant agree to it. Maybe have them sign something that you're creating an addendum to the lease, and they do have to agree to it. If they don't agree to it, then you do have to wait till renewal to ask again. So I would say you can certainly ask and see if they'll do it sooner, but renewal would be the best time to do it. If it's month to month, technically that renews every month. So you could just do it at usually within a 30 or 60-day notice, depending on the state, allows you to edit a lease on a month-to-month lease agreement. Okay. Amir, what number do we call to get a comprehensive credit check on the potential tenant? So you can call us if you need to. So I'll put the phone number here to you, Amir, if you want to call us to get more information about our screening. You can also go just to AAOA.com, and that's where we have all of our options listed. But of course, we have plenty of people who can answer questions for you about all of our products and services. If you want to give us a call, sometimes I answer the phone too. So you might get me and we can go through it. Rose says, is that $20 max application fee in New York to include the fee for the credit report, or can that be charged separately? So that would be include the fee for the credit report, $20 no matter what it is. It just cannot be more than that. I know it's pretty low actually. So a lot of landlords have to pay out of pocket for at least part of the background check nowadays in New York. Elizabeth, do renters insurance policies ever cover the cost of tenants' temporary relocation, like a hotel stay, um, during major equipment breakdown and replacement, or like when the furnace dies in the middle of winter? Sometimes. So it depends on the policy. It also depends on your policy too. So sometimes it might go through your policy if it's something like that. You might have an insurance policy where it's going to cover a tenant in case that their renter's insurance does not. I think most of the time it does land on the landlord's policy, if I'm not mistaken, but definitely check if you see a tenant who's applying what renter's insurance policy they're getting so you're aware of exactly what it covers. Sarah says, I put on the lease that they need renter's insurance. I never check the paper. So if anything happens and they didn't buy it, am I still liable for it? So short answer is yeah. So like if they don't buy it and you're not checking, then yeah, you're still liable because there's no policy in place. So the best thing to do is to ask them to list you as an additional insured on the policy so that you get notified if they end up canceling the policy. So that's important. Make sure that you are in the know of their policy and that you're checking in on that policy as well. Although the insurance company should be telling you if there is a breach in the policy. Okay, another one here. Can the landlord charge the full amount of their credit check expense regardless of any regulatory maximum? No, that is a maximum for a reason. So max is max. You cannot go over that. Even if the cost itself is higher than that, you would be just coming out of pocket if you wanted to, get a more comprehensive screening. Fortunately, in most states, at least for our reports, as you know, they're $20 to $50 each. That's going to be well below the maximum in almost every state except for New York. So you should be fine, but don't charge for your time and like extra stuff and then it goes way out of hand. That's really, I think, what the laws are in place for. Where can I find out more information on how to get lease guarantee? So what you can do is go to our website, AAOA.com, and there's a lease guarantee option under solutions. I can send you more information after this as well, and I'll include it in the follow-up email. If you are interested in looking at the terms and conditions, we have that all listed on our website. And then when you need lease guarantee, what I would suggest is you screen tenants through AAOA.com or tenantalert.com. That's automatically included in every report. And so you're going to basically see if they qualify, how much it would cost, and you can get the policy after you screen the tenant. That's usually how it works. You use our screening, and then when you get the results, you can choose to move forward with lease guarantee. It'll be at the very top of the report. You can't miss it. And then if you have questions, you can let us know. We can help you to get that set up. Okay. Rose, if a tenant has rented over 1 year, how much notice do I need to give to increase rent to in San Diego? I believe it's going to be a 60-day, but I would say definitely consult with an attorney just in case there might be any provisions specific to San Diego. Okay. Glenn, can you require a tenant with an emotional support animal to have renter's insurance indemnifying a landlord against dog bites when tenants without animals do not have to buy such a policy? So this one is a little bit of a gray area. Technically, you're treating them slightly differently, but I would talk to an attorney just to be sure. To be honest, I don't want to give you bad advice on that. Whether or not they would have to buy a policy and it's only tenants with emotional support animals. I'm not too sure on that one, Glenn. That's a great question. I'll see what I can find out for you and get back to you on that. Um, I'm not skipping anyone's questions. I'm just trying to go in order of like from bottom to top. So I know that's probably not the best way to do it, but it's just the easiest way for me to kind of track how many I'm getting here. So let me go back to you, Shelley. Sorry about that. Um, Okay, if I use a management company and the management company gives incorrect information to potential tenants, am I liable? Yes, you are. So usually when there is a lawsuit from the tenant's side, they're going to go after anyone who's involved. And so even if you're not directly the one saying it, you're hiring the property management company there is some form of liability, you are probably going to be in that lawsuit. So it's definitely important to make sure that your property managers are properly trained, that you feel confident that they're saying everything that they should be and that they're not violating any fair housing laws. Marion, are we forced to rent to pedophiles, rapists, or murderers? No, we can definitely still do a criminal background check. HUD is not saying that we cannot use criminal background data at all. They do make an exception for sex offenders throughout any of the local laws, even. That's always a thing. So don't worry about that necessarily. A sex offender report is included with the criminal. And so you aren't forced to rent to anybody there, like, especially if it's a murder directly obviously relates to the safety of the people in that rental unit. I think what they're trying to do, the essence of it is that they're trying to prevent landlords from declining tenants who maybe have an unrelated sort of criminal offense that maybe doesn't really affect their ability to pay rent. Like I mentioned, the DUI, for example. But absolutely, that would be a risk and a safety threat. So I don't see an issue with that. But I still, again, would contact your screening provider, make sure that's legitimately their record, make sure that, an attorney is going through with you exactly how to decline said renter if that's the reason, just to be on the safe side. Gigi, is there a definition of ability to pay? I don't think there is so much if you're talking about the California law, right? It's tough to say exactly what that means other than income, but income of any kind, I suppose. So definitely worth talking to an attorney about that term as well if you're not too sure if your criteria might be infringing on that. Also, let me go back up. I'm going to try to go up to the top here of questions that we have. Okay. Uh, Deanne, how about making it necessary to provide an ID and a notarized application? So you can ask for an ID, of course, and notarized application, that's going to be more so optional as well, maybe a little tough to pull off. I haven't seen any laws that prevent you from doing that, but might just be a bit inconvenient. So up to you on that. Okay. I answered some of these questions already, so let me just mark those as answered. Okay, Philip, can I ask if any occupants have a medical need to use crack cocaine or heroin? I mean, I wouldn't I wouldn't say those are legal uses of those are not legal substances. So you do not have to accept that. Even marijuana, you don't have to accept. It's not technically legal federally, and so you can actually decline any applicant that is using any sort of illegal substance. That's pretty clear across the board throughout state and federal law. Okay, Shelley, do I need to give potential tenants a form to sign which allows me to contact their references? Yes, so our rental application online is free and it does have a disclosure that the tenant signs. So you can go to AAOA.com and look at the forms in the menu that we have. So the rental application is free and it does have that disclosure in there so you can contact the landlord or employer references of any kind. Okay. Tim Schroeder. If a resident is a university student from another nation with a student visa that does not allow them to have employment, does that also preclude their spouse from having a job? Would it be possible in such a case for their spouse to get a job or to work in a W-9 position? I'm not too sure how that might work. I think it might be possible. I would say look up the immigration and work status laws. I'm not too familiar with those myself, to be honest. But I want to say it would be possible, but it's definitely worth looking into just to make sure that that all adds up, right? If they're telling you that they're working, is it even possible for them to work, right? So definitely a good question. Jacqueline, is there a penalty for not providing rejection notices? I'm sure there might be, but I haven't heard of any big lawsuits about tenant declination letters. And so it's more so like if you're getting sued for not following X, Y, or Z, what does that look like? So it's not like there's a set penalty fee. It's more of like if a tenant were to sue you, right, that's going to vary and how that looks will vary. Most of the time with that kind of thing, I would think it would be more of like a class action lawsuit or maybe a larger property management company that might be doing things wrong and they might get targeted more so than you. But it's always good to have best practices just in case. Okay, Ted, I believe fair housing law said that assisted or emotional support animals cannot be considered pets. That is correct. So even with a no pet policy, a landlord must allow or consider an animal that is an assistance or emotional support. Yes, that is true. Okay. Okay. If a landlord uses a management company to find tenants or deal with tenants, and the management company makes a mistake, makes a discriminatory mistake, will I be liable as the landlord? Yes. So I think we answered that uh, in the other question that we had earlier. That might have been you too, Shelley. So I hope that that answered what you needed. Do I need to give a new tenant a mold report? So yes, in California you do. I think there's other states where if there were any occurrences of mold that you would need to have a mold disclosure. So definitely look into that if you need to add it. If you're using our forms that we have for our lease agreement, it will automatically include an addendum for that. So I would say like using AAOA's forms is a great way to create a lease because if you answer the form questions, it's going to kind of give you a quiz type of thing. It's going to ask you like when your home was built, what kind it is, and where it's located. And then it'll create a lease agreement based on your answers, and it will also include addendums based on your answers. Aaron, since California recently limited the security deposit to just 1 month, instead of requiring additional pet security deposit, I'm adding a pet fee to every month's rent. If the tenant claims it's a support animal, can I still charge that? No, you can't. So you can't charge a pet fee to an emotional support animal or service animal, but you can have a pet fee for regular pets. That's fine. Rose, is there any documentation tenants can provide to prove that the pet is an emotional support animal? So again, there, we have some webinars on this, but normally it's going to be a medical or a professional relationship with the tenant that would indicate that they have a need for said emotional support animal. Usually it's a doctor, but it can be any kind of medical provider. So I'd be happy to send you the webinar that we did on that. We're going to do another update actually in a couple of months in April on that topic. So that'll also help clear up, I think, some of these questions. What do you do if a child sex offender is applying to live near children? In terms of criminal background, don't accept them. That's definitely a legitimate reason, as I mentioned, where at least for sex offenders is what we're seeing, and illegal substance manufacture. Those are two things that even in public housing is, a reason that you can deny someone. So absolutely, I would say make sure it's actually legitimate, that it's actually them and their record, and you don't have a mistake on your hands, but you can deny them for that reason. Are there any insurance companies issuing a building policy that would insure a landlord against housing discrimination claims or other acts as a landlord? So we're probably going to have an insurance webinar coming up soon as well. But yes, there is. So you would want to get sort of like an umbrella policy that would help you out with any sort of fair housing lawsuits. It's definitely more pricey, but it could be worth it, especially nowadays when we have a pretty litigious sort of culture amongst tenants. Shelley, when will we be receiving a recording? Tomorrow. I'm glad you thought the information was good. Okay. In what section will a tenant use her renter's insurance besides breaking in or a fire? Dog bites, as I mentioned, slip and fall of a guest, any sort of theft. I used renter's insurance back in the day when I had my laptop stolen out of my car. It wasn't even in my rental, and it still covered it. So really any kind of theft or any damage to property that is, not the tenant's fault. Let's see. Third-party pet screening is available for lawful ligament animal. Not sure what you mean by that, Rosalie, but there are pet screening companies, so like they can handle that process for you to process an emotional support animal request if you don't want to handle it yourself. You can look that up, and they do a pretty good job of doing that. But I think once you learn, the way that it works, there's no reason you can't do it on your own. But if you have a lot of applicants requesting it, it might be worth it to hire another company to help you with those requests. Okay, what about arson convictions? Are they excluded also, or do such persons have to be considered? So I know that that's a direct correlation to not being a good tenant, probably. I would say that's probably a good reason to reject a tenant, but again, talk to an attorney. All right, I'm going to send you all the emotional support animal information that I have after this, so I'm not going to answer any more questions on that topic so we don't get too far off. Is there a suggested amount of coverage for renter's insurance? I would say, normally $20,000 is pretty good. The renter ultimately gets options, so, whatever's affordable in the area, but it shouldn't be for them more than like $20, $30 a month to get that amount of coverage. Again, it really depends on the renter and the area in which the rental is in. But I would say like 20,000 is usually a good amount to cover their belongings. What is the responsibility of a broker for management companies' discrimination policies? So, Everett, I'm going to get back to you on that. I know there was someone else who had some questions about like how the broker or an agent plays a part in all of this, and I want to be accurate with it. So, I'm going to look into that and make sure I get you all a good response for those of you that are agents or brokers. Ted, did you say that it's not legal to consider a past eviction as a basis for declining or denying a rental application? No, it is. It is legal. However, HUD has said now that in this last year that evictions also have disparate impact, and so you still can't just do like an automatic sort of denial. You need to look at why they were evicted, have they recovered since, and so on. So in essence, again, HUD isn't saying that you can't use eviction records or that it's illegal to do so, but just that they want you to consider other factors. Again, it's not a law, it's guidance, but if they're issuing the guidance, I would adhere to it because it's going to help you out in terms of like if you were to get sued or something. So I would say still consider evictions, but just make sure you're looking into a little more than just are they evicted or not. Okay. Also, Sarah, the reason I continue to persist the issue of criminal background checks is because I had an issue with the state attorney in Illinois. Illinois is notoriously has quite a few background check laws, and it is difficult, I think, for landlords in that area. So I hear you. There was a tenant with a criminal problem of some sort. They told me that they could not make me evict the person, but if they remained on my property, but if they remained on my property, it would be boarded up. Ooh, wow. Everything worked out. Luckily, there was a month-to-month lease and the tenant was evicted. Since then, I have required criminal background. Now, are you telling me that I can't? So, no, you absolutely can do a criminal background. Of course, that is not saying that you cannot do criminal background. However, you do need to look at the circumstances of said crime. So, when it occurred, how long ago it occurred, make sure that it's relevant to the rental and that it's not just something that is, a speeding ticket or something that's really irrelevant, right? So again, I would say check with an attorney if you're ever going to deny someone for criminal because it is a little tricky and you want to be careful if you are denying it for that reason. You could deny for financial. That's fine. So if they don't meet your credit score, that's a good reason to give. But if it is something else, then I would say definitely just to be careful, make sure you talk to an attorney. But again, there's no reason that you cannot deny someone based on a criminal record or you cannot run a criminal background check. That is still something you can do. Are landlords allowed to tell tenants how much renter's insurance they require? I would double check again with an attorney. I'm not 100% sure if that's something you can require or not. Are criminal backgrounds in California not allowed now? That's not true. They are still allowed. However, Alameda County has removed all background checks, and Los Angeles County has made most criminal records hard to identify because they've removed the date of births off of them. So there are some limitations to criminal background data in California, but for most of California, we can still pull all the data that you need. And criminal backgrounds were never a part of a credit report. So that was never a thing. It still is not on a credit report. So it doesn't affect their credit score if they've had a criminal sort of record. Okay, now that I'm done with Q&A, I'm going to go to the chat real quick. So some of you are asking some other questions here that I think I already covered. I think some of you put them in sort of duplicate, some in the chat, some in the Q&A. I think I've covered pretty much everything. I'm going to go back and look at the chat after this and just make sure that I got everyone's questions answered. I thank you all for sticking around for so long, and I hope that you all take the exit survey and make sure that you tell me if there are some ideas. We have lots of new member benefits that we're floating around. I'd love to hear your opinion and which ones you think are most beneficial to you. Have a couple other questions in there as well. Again, I'm going to be sending you the recording and the presentation tomorrow. So look out for that from me. I really appreciate all your time and lots of thank yous in the chat. So happy to see that. I'm glad you all learned something hopefully new today, and I hope to see you in about a week. I think we're going to have our next webinar, so that's exciting. I'll include the invitation to the next webinar in the follow-up email as well. And again, if you need to reach me at all, you can. So I'm going to put my email in that follow-up as well. We could always go over any questions you have. So thank you again for sticking around. I'll be in touch soon. Take care, everyone.